So Sachin, thank you so much for joining us in the next edition of the Fire Up series. This startup peer experience sharing series. Every startup has some interesting experiences, something that they've done well, and so we're just hoping that we can capture that during this downtime and
Sure.
put it out there for other startups to kind of pick up whatever they think is relevant to them. So for you, Agilitics, I think not many have somebody like Big Basket as your first customer. So we thought like, okay, why not we discuss that? I mean, how do you kind of how do you create value, especially in the enterprise space, in the B2B space? How do you create value to be able to snag a major corporate as your first customer? So that's what we're going to be discussing. So
Okay.
thank you. And before we get started, Sachin, why don't you just quickly share the whole journey? I mean, how did the whole idea come about for Agilitics, and
Sure.
uh, and the journey over the last 2 years? If you can just quickly share next few minutes.
Sure. Very happy to. So, firstly, thank you for the opportunity. I mean, it's really nice to be able to talk about something that's so personal for and such a big part of our lives for the past few years. So, thanks for that. Um, so, the journey basically started for us about a couple of years ago, where the founding team kind of all individually in their own careers went through the transformation of taking their existing organizations to the cloud, whether it was building new SaaS products or taking existing products to the cloud or transforming engineering teams. And you know how it is. So all of us kind of went through that. And a common theme emerged from that was that there was a gap in the tool chain to kind of support the newer architectures for cloud native applications. You know, elastic microservices being composed into larger services, then eventually becoming the application. So the tools that existed didn't quite cater to this architecture and the complexity that came with the composition and the number of different aspects to a large application of that. There were tools, but we were kind of making do with them. So we saw a gap. The second thing we noticed was that a lot of these organizations, you mentioned Big Basket, and then some of the others like Big Basket that we're very familiar with, and many other enterprises, even in existence much longer than Big Basket, we can consider have legacy applications. They've all built really strong data measurement, metrics measurement, data collection pipelines, and they're sitting on this fabulous amount of really rich multi-dimensional data that's coming in. And some other companies like the newer, the ones that we are familiar with, like Big Basket, Swiggy, Zomato, all these guys, they're very wide operational footprint. You know, pan India, hundreds of cities, lot of geographies, thousands and thousands of product SKUs. So the data is very voluminous, very rich, very multidimensional. And again, there was very little that was supporting the data. I mean, collecting it is one thing, but being able to use it to improve your business, or use it to do something meaningful, get insights out of it, there seemed to be a gap there. So we thought there was an opportunity to build something from a clean slate, build something from scratch, dedicated to the challenges of these modern architectures, focused on their issues, as well as these businesses with this really wide footprint. So fundamentally, the problem was scale. Scale in terms of the volume of data, scale in terms of the dimensionality, and dimensionality. I mean, we can go into it deeper, but basically what dimensionality does is every time you add another dimension, you're multiplying the complexity. So it's not additive. So each time you break it by geography, you break the geography by, say, for example, whether it's Apple, Android, or web, and then by the version of your application, you're multiplying complexity by the cardinality of that dimension. So it explodes very quickly, and it becomes really hard to solve, really hard for tools to deal with it. So that's the problem we wanted to solve, technically speaking, is that deal with the scale and then provide automated insights on top of this data. Yeah, so that is one aspect of it. That's the technical aspect, this technical challenge of scale. The other aspect of it is the human interaction part of it, the user interaction part of it. So it's one thing for us to ingest and provide all this data back, but really what you want the person to be able to do is to give that person a tool set that gives them the power to interact with this data, to extract information that is valuable to them, to be able to make sweeping statements that is across their entire data set or a very narrow aspect of the data set. So that's where we saw Agiletics fit in as a platform and as a solution and a tool set that caters to providing automatic insights from very large volume business data.
So, yeah, like it's one thing to have the technology that can do everything you described, right? Getting data from different places, trying to correlate time series, and like kind of get the. Now, it is something entirely different to connect that with a specific need that a company might have.
Yep.
So, how did you make that connection before even going and talking to Big Basket? How do you make that connection that this is what somebody like this Big Basket might be looking for? How do you make that connection?
Okay. So I credit the vision for what we set out to do to Rajiv, the other founder of Agiletics. So he had this idea that companies like this Big Basket would have a particular set of issues because of the scale of their problems. So what we decided to do was we built an MVP, just enough to go and validate with Big Basket whether they thought there was value in engaging with us with what we had built. It was a fairly decent MVP, but we didn't try to go whole hog, imagine everything that they would need and then kind of go after years. So we kind of went as quickly as we could, and we talked to them about what we think is the solution to a problem, and then they validated that the problem exists. And with Big Basket, we basically had a couple of various things. When I said insights for data, it's pretty broad. So with Big Basket, the specific problem they were struggling with, or they wanted us to solve was, their development team generates a huge volume of logs. It's a very, very busy system. It's massive. And any software application, even one that's running just fine, produces a lot of exceptions and errors on a regular basis. So you are, you have temporary network connectivity issues, or you have authentication problems, or a number of different things that keep happening. Many a times, resiliency takes care of it. Services retry and all that happens. So it's fine. But you see a huge volume of these issues. And what Big Basket wanted to do was get on top of it. Like, how can they actually manage the exceptions, and which ones are the ones they should deal with? So the default way was, you put a filter of some kind in a log, it lets you know when an exception occurs, but you're talking about millions of them. So it's not practical, it's not feasible to actually do that. So what the solution we put in place was, we said we can go through the logs, we can classify all these errors and exceptions into classes based on some classification algorithms. And then using that, we can generate a time series out of each class of exception. And that allows us to model every one of those. So there are millions kind of came down to about a few thousands. And then we have at scale systems that can model all of these 1,000 time series as individuals, and we can look for deviations from patterns. So we can tell them we can basically bring it down to, hey, these are the 20 exceptions that have gone out of whack today, and they can go focus on those 20. And that allowed their development team to be a lot more focused on the problems that are happening right now that might affect their customers, versus chasing things that are not really a problem. So that was the Big Basket scenario. We had similar approach, different problem for, say, one of our other customers, Swiggy. So we went with them for the more traditional, or they were looking for a more traditional anomaly detection for business operations kind of use case, but at massive scale. They are pan-India. They are about 1,500 geographies or plus that, and a huge number of metrics. They collect an enormous amount of metrics. They have very sophisticated systems themselves, which kind of change the behavior of the system based on what's going on. And in that system, to be able to find what is not working and alert them was basically the problem that we are solving for.
So once they once they've seen your product, understood what it can do, and they've spotted some possibilities within their organization, then they go and talk to you, like Big Basket did for you. Explain that this is what we need, and then work with you in kind of building it. But what did you take to them first? What did they see that connected with them and that they wanted to work with you? Because there's a key starting point, right? If that doesn't happen, then nothing happens. What if that connection happens? Don't even start talking.
Yeah. So yes, that's true. It's a valid point. So we ourselves had a basic premise, right? Like I said in the beginning. So the product basically consists of putting our customers' data at the center. So the product is basically a foundational piece of the product is a massively scalable, long-term time series database or data retention engine that we can scale. It's multi-tenanted, so there is economies of scale and all that. And that allows us to hold data for really long term. That is something that, for example, logs can't do. Cost of it's prohibitive for logs to hold long term data, but this thing can do it. So that was one of our premise, that you should have access to your data. So there's the storage, and then of course there is access. So we have a really powerful query engine that allows you to, it's domain specific. It speaks the language of the data, so it allows you to make very rich queries in a very concise fashion. So we did build the basics. We did kind of visualize what they would need from that perspective, and we demonstrated significant technical prowess in achieving the goals of being able to deal with massive volumes of data. So we went with sub-second latency for ingestion, or like few milliseconds latency for ingestion, and sub-second latency for millions of data points returned processed in a query. So we could demonstrate that. We also went with other things that in the conversation with them, we knew what their problem area was and how it fit with what we were trying to solve. So we had specific demonstrators of what we could do with their specific problem. Same thing with Swiggy. I mean, Swiggy pretty much, a couple of days after we onboarded them, we were giving them insights on servers in their clusters that were stuck at 100% or were doing nothing, that they had not realized was happening. So we could help them immediately with stuff like that. So that there was a lot of initial vision of ours on what might be of value to them, which panned out. And then we took it from there based on conversations with them on which direction would be more meaningful for the problem they wanted to solve.
So in a way, it worked out that since you knew they're going to be dealing with lots of data, so you make sure those responses were there, so they could experience it quickly, and then say, okay, like if you could do with this data, then you could do with something else that they're thinking of also.
Yeah.
But, do you try listing specific problems they might be having? That's another way of one way to enter such a large company is to show the power of the product, even if it's not in their use case, but show the power of the product and tell them, look, it's going to be similar for you. You just have to tell us what data you want, what insights you want. We can do it as well.
Yes.
The other way to get in is to try and understand. I mean, if you know that they have this problem, like when you mentioned the server use case, if somehow you knew that they had this problem and you could go and tell them, look, I can solve it for you. Did you try that route also, of trying to understand the problem they might already have and then tell them, look, we can solve it for you?
Yes, actually a mix of both. So we are a very young startup, like we try to keep it. We try to keep the original feature set very lean, so we didn't go chasing problems that people didn't necessarily want us to solve. So we did a little bit of what you just said, which is that we had the initial product set which demonstrated significant capabilities in being able to deal with a massive volume of data. But we also engaged our customers in conversations to figure out what is it that they would want us, what are the problems they are looking to solve that are not solved for them. So we had very nice conversations with both BigBasket and Swiggy, some of which are definitely longer term problems that we are not focusing on right now. But there are many immediate problems that the product can solve. In some cases out of the box, in some cases it's a release roadmap thing that we try and get it out as soon as possible, and we've done a number of those for both of them. So it's been a mix of that. Especially, I mean, I think it's a function of how young we are and the fact that we want to evolve the product specifically catering to the use cases that we are coming across. So the next thing that's happened is with one of them is that they understand what we can do. So both of them actually, they understand what we can do, and they've kind of widened the scope of our our product's usage beyond what we had originally discussed. So in one of the cases, we are validating the result of one of their algorithms, because there are millions and millions of orders being placed, and it's really hard for a human to go and figure out if any of the orders are not correct, if there's something out of whack with it. But algorithms can do that. So we are kind of validating the result of their automatic ordering and all that, and that is not something that originally discussed as being part of the application here, but it's a very good fit. I mean, it's still an anomaly detection. It's still a big data problem. It's still an analytics issue. It's still an anomaly detection problem. It's not monitoring, but it fits just fine. So we've seen examples of where they've understood what we can do, and they've kind of widened our scope for us.
That's a perfect scenario. I mean, like, they are telling problems now that you could solve. So I know that's a perfect scenario. Now, how did you pick? I mean, see, initially there are, even if I assume like, okay, somebody like BigBasket, which has like very, very high transaction volume on the internet, consumer facing, are the ones is the sweet spot. Even having identified that, how do you pick BigBasket and Swiggy? I mean, like, was it just some cosmic forces at work, or did you more consciously pick?
Both of them were connections, friends and connections, in terms of at least the initial introduction, at least the opportunity to talk to them about the product and what we are doing and how we can solve certain problems for them. So that was the entry at that point. Obviously, as we scale the company, we need to switch from that model to a model where we have a sales team that is going after these opportunities. But at the moment, I mean, for the stage of the company, and you are absolutely right. For us, companies like BigBasket and Swiggy and that class of companies is our sweet spot in the sense that they have the volume of data where that scale is a problem, and it's a serious enough problem for their business that they want to solve it, and they're motivated. And secondly, for them, the loss of business because of an outage, because of some operational issue, is significant. I mean, if you can't order from Swiggy, you'll switch to Zomato. I mean, it's as simple as that. So they don't want that to happen. So they are very keen on making sure their systems are running smoothly all the time. So they were really in the sweet spot for us, which meant that they engaged really well with us. We could engage really well with them, and they helped drive a lot of the feature set in the product to make it meaningful for that class of. So we kind of focused on that more than acquiring any more or broadening the sales net at this point, because the maturity they introduced to the product, I mean, I don't think we could have gotten it any other way.
True. I mean, once they start using it, and kind of it does hash out many things in the product. So before we conclude, Sachin, one last point. What would be, from your experiences, right, both in the prior corporate world, but more specifically in the last 2 years in the journey with Agilitex, what would be one growth hack tip that you will share from your experiences for other startups?
Growth handicap.
No, growth hack. Growth hack.
Growth hack. So I don't know if this will apply for all classes of startups out there. I mean, I don't think it will fit, for example, the self-service kind of SaaS startups. But for something like us, where we are engaging one-on-one with a large customer, and the engagement is not short. I mean, it's extended engagement. Keeping it really lean worked for us. We are a small team, so we kind of didn't try to go overboard with features or add bloatware that nobody's using. So we kind of kept it very focused on what our customers wanted. Apart from the vision and the MVP, a lot of what's happened subsequently have been driven by either customer features that they specifically want to use as soon as it is available, or we focused on strengthening the product, adding data resilience. For example, the models are online, highly resilient to data gaps, bad data, and all that. And we try to kind of minimize the cost of the data platform itself or the anomaly detection engine itself, to make it much more cost sensitive for both for us and for what we can offer. So we focused a lot on that. So that allowed us to not spend all our energies on building things that nobody might end up using, because we had a bright idea, but unless we validate it with customers, we haven't really gone after building anything massive that that didn't make sense. However, that is not to say that we haven't been innovating. We have the unique advantage of being able to see how a lot of these companies how they're operating and what specific problems they have. So we are able to take best practices out of that and productize it. We are able to build newer features that are we know will be much more useful for another customer like that, or innovate based on our learnings from these guys. So we're trying to use it that way, versus just kind of having a crazy vision that we are not, without validating, we're going and building. So trying to keep it as lean as we can.
I think makes a lot of sense. I think especially when you have early stages before you have a lot of customers, very lean and lean team. You have to make sure anything you do has a clear purpose. You don't do just
Exactly.
for the. I mean, some experimentation will definitely happen. Some things may work, some things may not work, but keep it as lean and quick and short as possible. So that's a fantastic tip. So Sachin, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us today in this Fire Up series. And thanks for taking time, and all the best. Please stay home, stay safe, and all the best.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak about